Hello everyone. So today we're going to talk about watercolor. I want to show you some of the tools I use, and then I'm going to give you a little demonstration on how they work so well. This brush is a 2-inch sky wash brush. I love it. It's very soft. Works really well to wet the paper or to actually work in big areas. I love a flat brush. This is a Simply Simmons. This is their inexpensive line. This is a number 1. It's a 1-inch, and I use it for a lot. In that same category is the 1/2-inch Simply Simmons. I use this for a lot as well. It's fading off, softening off. This is my favorite brush of all time. So this is the Robert Simmons from the same company, only it's not in the Simply line. It's an expensive brush, however, this is 20 years old and it has just kept its shape beautifully. Works really well for charging in. This is the brush I use to mix my colors. It's a round brush. The reason for that is because it doesn't hold a lot of water. So I'm not adding a lot of water when I'm mixing my watercolor paints. Of course, a rigger. Gotta have it for little detail work. I'll show you that in a little bit. And this is the palette knife I use. Reason for this is because it's got several different surfaces. You can scrape lots of things around. I'll show you that on rocks. You can scrape shorter, smaller areas, or you can use it to flick the edge of it to create vein lines and branches and things like that. So continuing with that, I want to show you some of the products I use. This is just a simple plastic Tupperware or Rubbermaid container from the grocery store with a lid, and then I just get little simple sponges and put them inside, clean them after every single use. They stay damp. While you're painting, you lay your brushes on them so your brushes don't become too wet or too dry. It's a great tool to use. You should get yourself one of those. The paper towels that I use are these blue shop towels that I get from Canadian Tire. It's about $2.99 for a big roll of them. They're very absorbent. They work great. The palette that I use is a round palette with separate mixing areas in it, mixing wells. So you put all of your color wherever you want it. You go back in whenever you need it. And then you have all of these different areas for mixing the color. You can get them in square, pretty much any size you like. I kind of like the round because it sort of reminds me of a color wheel. Now we're going to talk about paper. Any watercolor paper will do, except use a very high quality. I do like Arches brand. It's very good quality. And I also prefer to paint on a block. This is a watercolor block. In this case, this is 300-pound paper. This one here is 140-pound paper. So it's lighter paper here, heavier here. The heavier paper does tend to be more textured as well. You may be able to see some of the texture there. They stay in the block, so when you're painting, nothing wobbles, nothing, you don't get any wavy, watery areas that are gonna make the paper go a little wonky. And then when you're taking them out, you just actually put your palette knife in here and slice all the way around. It's a great watercolor paper to use. But if you are gonna buy something like this, definitely buy the Arches. The water container that I use when I'm painting my watercolors is this one. I love it because it has ridges on the inside. It's got a separated area so I can keep some water clean as I'm cleaning my brushes on this side. The ridge area works really well if you're trying to clean off the paint off your brush. It also has these lovely holes around here which will stand up all of your brushes while you're working. I do tend to lean them into the sponge, but before I use them, I keep them in here and then I know where I'm going. So we're going to start this little demo by showing you some of the lessons that I have already taught. This one here, these grapes, they are all about charging in with color, leaving some white on the paper and working with the white of the paper to create the texture on the grapes themselves. Charging in with darks and lights and little bits of yellow and the deeper red crimson to make those grapes just look like they have a little bit of that soft, you know, sometimes when you buy grapes and they have that soft, almost a dusty film on them. That's how you achieve that. And this is on my YouTube channel. This lesson as well, another watercolor lesson here. This is the Seascape So this is all about graded washes, rolling in the sky, graded wash for the water, and then to leave the white to allow for the look of the waves. And then of course charging it with a lot of color. We also use the palette knife on this one to create the grasses. A little bit of dry brush to create the texture on the water. And of course the trees. This is also online. This one, I taught at one of my actual classes, so it's not on the YouTube channel. However, notice all of the different textures in here. These lemons have been stippled, so I use a stippling brush just to dab, lifting some of the paint out before it's dry. And this is what I'm going to show you today as well. This is done with a palette knife to create the vein lines in the leaves. So this one here, this one is on my YouTube channel. This is an introduction to negative painting. So using the white of the paper to create the shadows, which will then form the look of the calla lily, the inside, creating the negative shape on the inside. And then of course the leaves charging in with additional color, creating the roundness of the stems, so you have a light side and a dark side to create the illusion of roundness on a flat piece of paper. That's on my YouTube channel. And then this one as well. So this was all about texture. A little bit of sky, lovely hills. This is a simple lesson. If you're a beginner, this would be a great lesson for you. To learn to leave a little bit of white, charging it with color, and then just a simple wash over top of the water with a bit of reflection. So that's what I've done on my channel, what is available to you. But today I want to give you a little bit of a free lesson, which is going to give you some hints and some of the techniques that I use. So we're going to start out with the palette knife. So as I showed you the leaves and how great they turn out with a little bit of charging in. So on my palette I have this deep green. It's a hooker's green. However, I have made it with yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, and then added a little bit of hooker's green at the end. So this was done a while ago, but you can see the beauty of watercolor is, of course, it just comes right back up and allows you to use it. So in this case, I want to charge in with some additional color. So I have this beautiful leaf green here, which I can use, and also some yellow. So we'll use yellow ochre because that's one of the colors we used in making the leaf itself. So this will be the first leaf we're going to do. So I'm going to use a flat brush. So this is a 1-inch flat. This is the Simply Simmons. And this brush is very inexpensive. You can buy it at any art store or at Michael's. I think it's around $4.99. It's a beautiful brush. I use it a lot. Now to make a leaf, do it the simple way. With watercolor, you really want the watercolor to kind of tell its own story. So if you don't fight with it and you don't force the painting or the paintbrush to do a job that you can allow the watercolor itself to do, quite often you'll get a beautiful, beautiful look. So for example, with a leaf, like these leaves here, notice the shape of them. I'm going to paint leaves in that shape. But what I'm going to do, instead of drawing them out and filling them in, I'm going to use the shape of the brush to create that leaf. So I'm going to start with the point of the brush, and then the brush is going to lay down, lift up, and create the leaf for me. So from tip to tip, the leaf is rounder in the middle, it's wider in the middle, and it starts with a point, ends with a point. So that's the principle behind this. So you lay the brush down and lift it up. Now because we're on dry paper, we get this beautiful dry brush effect. So there's my little stem. So here it is again. Lay the brush down, lift it up. Notice that they're a little different because I pressed the brush a little bit more to get it the width a little bit wider, leaving a little bit of the dry brush on the edge, which means that leaf has a little texture, maybe it's a little crispy on the end. You wait just a minute or so until you're seeing a sheen rather than a shine. We're going to put a little vein line in here. So it's definitely pretty shiny. It can't be too wet. If it's very wet, what'll happen is the water will sink back in and it'll end up being a dark color for your vein line, which is also nice. And if you're looking for that, then that's what you're going to wait for, is for something that is very wet to begin with. However, if you want it to be just a flick and white, you use the point of the palette knife and flick. And that gives you that beautiful white vein line. So it's, again, very simple process, but making beautiful, beautiful leaves. So now if we want to do a leaf where we're going to charge in with some color, let's make that leaf a little more delicate with respect to how much water is in the paintbrush. So we can definitely charge in. Let's throw a leaf there, put its little stem, and then I'm going to go in with the flat 1/2 inch brush with that yellow that we created. And as it's wet, I'm just going to charge in with a little bit of yellow. So this might be the beginning of fall, where the leaves are just starting to turn. And this is also where it's beautiful to have that textured edge, the dry brush edge. If it's spring, we can go in with a little bit more of this brighter green, but I think I'm going to leave it as a fall leaf. So you can see that little bit of yellow right along that edge, which is allowing it to look like that's where the color is fading out of the leaf and it's starting to turn into a fall leaf. So I'm going to wait just a second or two till it's ready for me to do the vein line. The difference when you use a vein line, it's so much more detailed without going into detail. You can paint a vein line in. However, when you use a palette knife, let's put a few more in this one. When you use a palette knife, notice here on the bottom of the leaf, it was too wet. So remember what I was telling you over there, if you go in too soon, what happens is the water goes right back into the canal that you've just created with the palette knife, and it'll create a darker area. Still not bothering me, and if you want dark vein lines, that's what you're going to do. You'll go in sooner. So in keeping with the leaf, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I would charge in to create a real fall colored leaf. So again, not a lot of paint on my brush, a little bit more water. I'm using this same process, creating that leaf. You can see it's more watery. That's because I want to charge in with some other colors. So let's use cadmium red, because of course we know what happens with these fall leaves when they start to turn from green to red. And because the painting is still wet, those colors are going to charge together. And then I'm going to go in with some yellow ochre, pushing it up into the red and against the red, which is really going to give me that look and feel of the leaf starting to turn. You can use a combination of reds if you like. You can also add a little bit of burnt sienna to make it a little bit more rustic looking. So you can see all those colors are really melding together quite nicely. And then you leave it just long enough for your vein line. Just a touch longer. Still, you're looking at it to try to see a sheen rather than a shine. And then you flick your palette knife. When you do that, you're literally scraping and lifting. Don't drag it slowly, because if you drag it slowly, you're never going to get that little flick look. So the next way I want to paint a fall leaf is my favorite way. Right now, what I want to teach you is to paint this leaf by loading your brush with different color. So I'm going to begin with red. Now the color needs to be pretty strong. So I'm putting red on the one corner. I'm putting yellow on the other corner. We'll see if this is going to work. It does need to have a lot of paint on it to do this, and I'm going to just add just a touch of green. So let's see what happens. This is always a gamble, but I really love painting like this. Look at that. So this gives you that beautiful fusion of color. So you can see the green is on the edge, which is really dark, running into the red and then into the yellow. That is a beautiful fall leaf. If you wanted to make it, and this is where you really want to use the dry brush effect because it's a fall leaf. It's starting to die off, and so therefore it would have a little crumbly end. And so then let's, with a little touch of green, and let's see what happens when we add more red. Wow. So you still have a little bit of the yellow. We've lost the green. However, as I said, this is when you let watercolor do its own thing. Go in with your palette knife, still a little bit too wet, but this is when you load your brush. So let's continue with that same brush, see what happens. We reload it with some more yellow to try to actually get some more yellow in this particular leaf. So we'll start with the yellow side and push it, and that's giving me a little bit more of the red mixed in with the yellow. So this brush technique, you can use it for big leaves, you can use it for little leaves, you can use it for little, tiny little buds as well. So you can see how you can create these beautiful branches of these wonderful leaves. So let's see if we can get our vein line in. So now, interestingly enough, what's happened here is the vein line is not as white. The reason for that is because cadmium red has stained the paper. Cadmium red is a bit more of a staining color, and so as it stains the paper, when it hits it, you can't necessarily get right back to the white of the paper. So that's our little lesson on quick leaves. Okay, so now we're going to talk about using the same palette knife to create really interesting textured rocks. Again, you can paint the rocks, make them all perfect, or you can paint them in a way that they're more loose and creative. How I do that is I'll go back, I'm actually going to use this 1/2 inch brush, and I'm going to think about all the colors. Think about like rocks up north, maybe in Sudbury, how some of the shale, some of the flat rocks have a little bit of color in them. So I'm going to start with some brown, add a little bit of color, and you'll see how magical this is. So I'm going to use raw umber to start the base of the rock color. And I'm going to use a little bit of blue because, again, I want that little touch of shale. And then I'm going to add a little bit of purple. So how I'm going to make my purple is with ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. That makes the most beautiful purple. Depending on how much blue you add and how much red you add is what you're going to get. You can modify it a little bit. Sometimes I'll add a little cerulean blue to it just to make it a little softer. Okay, I like that. So now, the trick here is to leave some white. To work fast, very fast, put in the shape of the rocks, but leaving some white, which will create a lot more interest. So I'll send actually a little bit of that gorgeous red, reddish brown. This is actually an Indian red, sort of a brick red. But you can also use many different colors. Use whatever colors you like. So again, Now, I'm not gonna paint in the rocks exactly the way I see them. I'm just gonna throw in some shapes, leaving lots of white. The reason for that you'll see shortly is because now I want to throw in additional colors. A little bit of green here and there. And let's throw in some of that yellow. So this is yellow ochre. Notice I'm leaving lots of white, some blue, and then a little bit of that beautiful purple. Just sort of create the illusion of that shale. So let's see what happens. While it's wet, you have to do this while it's wet. You're going to use the fat part of the palette knife and you're going to scrape these colors together, leaving some white, and you're going to force the crevices. See how you're pushing the palette knife around, leaving some white, forcing the crevices in between where the rocks are sitting. This is a wonderful technique. Creating crevices, leaving some white, and allowing for this beautiful look of rocks maybe along the shoreline. How interesting is that? Gorgeous colors all moving in together. Very interesting rocks. Much more interesting than if you were to actually paint them painstakingly, step by step by step. You're also never going to get this loose quality and feel to these rocks, and you're certainly not going to get that beautiful charging in of color that happens automatically. The reason why we're seeing all those colors is, as you'll notice, when we did this, I didn't charge in with color into what was already there. I added all the new color on top of the white paper. So what happens then is that is what stains the paper. As soon as the paper is stained with that color, no matter what you do around it, the staining effect continues to work. So now if we're going to talk about, to move on from the palette knife now, we've got those nice examples. Let's talk about painting trees. We're going to talk about painting trees in the fall or in the winter, where we're really showing the branches. So I'm going to begin. We've done this in class many times, but this is a little refresher. So let's begin. We want to also make the tree look round. So begin with the raw umber, maybe add a little burnt sienna to it, which is that brick red kind of color, just to create a more interesting depth to the color. I want to keep a light side and a dark side. So I'm going to say that the sunlight is coming from the left to the right, meaning that the left-hand side of the trunk is going to be lighter, the right-hand side of the trunk is going to be darker. Notice I'm never using black. So I'm going to begin this process with painting in the trunk and allowing the trunk to turn into branches, big branches to start out with. So we'll begin by planting the tree, softening it on the bottom to make sure that there's not a hard line. And then I'm going to add, with the same brush, a little bit of blue to the brown, which is going to darken it. Notice I'm not using black. And that dark, I'm going to put on the dark side of the tree. And what that'll do is it'll allow the tree to look like it is darker on the one side, so perhaps round. And I'm going to take my little flat brush and I'm going to lift the paint on the left-hand side of the tree, which is where the light is. Let's make that nice and light. So lifting paint is as simple as using your brush like an eraser. So it's a little bit damp, but not wet. It has no color on it, so I keep that brush very, very, very clean. And I'm just gently going over top of what I've already painted because it's damp, so it'll lift. And I'm allowing the paintbrush to act like an eraser and lift some of that paint out. I'm also throwing in a few little lines for texture while I'm painting it, which is giving me that look of a round tree. trunk. Now that we have our tree trunk, let's go to our branches. Going to this beautiful rigger brush that I love. Branches, I'm not worried too much about light side and dark side because they're all pretty skinny. I now want to work off of the larger branches that I have made and extend them out to these lovely little gnarly branches. So remember that a branch starts off wider at the actual tree and then gets narrower. I can really show you that on this side. So if there's a branch coming out of here, it starts off a little wider and then goes off to almost nothing. And this beautiful rigger brush is going to give me great, great branches. And I'm just allowing them to be all gnarly and elbowy rather than S's. I'm not painting them in a circular fashion. I'm painting them in a broken kind of a jagged fashion. As many as you like, or just a few. This is just great practice for painting branches. Notice that I'm going over top of the other branches as well. Reason for that is it's going to create the illusion of depth. Some branches are in front, some are behind. Let's make this one a little fatter, attached to that branch, and have this branch work come out. So keep it a little heavier next to the tree and a little lighter as you move away from the tree. So again, as I said, as many or as few as you like, but that's going to give you a real lovely look to a tree trunk that now has light and dark. Notice by lifting a little bit of paint out in the trunk as I was lifting or erasing some of the color, I just pushed in a little bit of shape to the trunk so it's twisted just a little bit. And by softening it on the bottom, it now looks like it's planted into the earth. So that's just another little technique that I do use often. Very quickly, I'm going to give you a real quick look at negative painting if you've never done this before. So, as with the calla lilies, we're going to paint on white paper, and I'm going to just show you a very quick calla lily, which will show you how to create the feeling of a large cup where the outside is closer to you, the inside is further away, but just soft, delicate shapes and shades of color. So I'm going to just use a very monochromatic color here. I need a little bit of green, but so light, and I'm never going to use green from the tube for this. So I'm going to use yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, which makes a beautiful, soft, non-intrusive green, kind of an army green. Gray green, which is the one that's not going to take over a painting. So I'm using this little flat brush. I have nothing to go on. I have no information. I have no idea what this is going to end up looking like. I'm just going to start by painting in the cup that I'm seeing, the inside part of the cup. So let's do that. So this is the inside part of the cup. I'm going to clean off that brush and I'm going to soften. This softening technique, very important, especially when you're doing negative work, because you're only creating one hard line. You're not creating two edges. You're creating a shadow. Again, the negative part of the painting, which is the part that is basically casting a shadow onto itself. So now you can see we have the beginning of a calla lily. So we continue with that down in front. Keep in mind that that's wet, so whatever you do, it's going to bleed into it, but we can use that to our advantage here. Let's go to the top of the calla lily, create a little bit of a point on it. And again, so I'm painting the negative part. softening off into the middle of the calla lily, allowing for the shape of that beautiful inside section. Down on the bottom, I want to start the process by creating the bottom part of the calla lily, the bottom cup. Again, remember where your hard line is. It's on the outside. So the inside is the negative part, just the shadow, just a little touch of color. Let's throw a little bit of yellow ochre on the bottom, just to let that bleed up into the calla lily. Add a little bit more green to that so it's a bit heavier, and come in with a stem. This way you don't get a hard line, but you get this lovely movement. And we want to create the feeling of the fold over on the calla lily petal itself. So again, you can see I'm painting the negative part of the calla lily. In other words, what I'm trying to allow to show is the actual fold over, where the petal itself folds right over into itself. And in doing so, what I'm not painting is what I'm trying to show. So now let's go paint just a little bit darker. So a little heavier green, not quite as much paint. And again, if the light's coming from the left to the right, we want the stem to look like it has a bit of a shadow casting onto itself on the darker side. You can go as heavy as you want with that. If you really want it to be emphasized, I put a little bit more blue in there. And then I'm going to make sure that hard line disappears. So now we have this beautiful little bit of a calla lily that's barely painted. And then once that's done, you can put in a stamen. I tend to paint the stamens very dark at the bottom as they're coming out of the flower itself, usually using a mixture of red, and I do tend to use a alizarin crimson for this because it's got blue in it, so it's nice and dark. Using a rigger, the reason for that is because I want control and I don't want a lot of water. I just want to stamen. So I'll start with the dark, a little bit of stippling effect, and then go to the yellow ochre and have it go from the red to the yellow, so it tends to brighten as it moves up. And there's our little calla lily. You can use the same technique that we used before for the branches and create little wispy grasses using the rigger. Little bits of grass, which just, let's put one over top of the calla lily. So again, pushing the feeling of something in front of something else, which is allowing for dimension. One thing is further back, perspective. One thing is further forward. So that's a little tiny lesson on negative painting. So this is just an overview of some of the techniques that I use in watercolor, some of the different ways I like to teach. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed this. If you did, and you haven't taken any of our lessons, have a look online. Go to Art World Fine Art and their classes section, and you will see all of the different classes that are available. We run specials on them, but each class is only $10. They're at least an hour long, and that class, you will have the link to the YouTube channel. You will always have that link, never expires. So what you end up getting for that $10 is a lesson that you will always have. You can refer to it whenever you want. You can also stop it and start it if you're going to do a full lesson, like the calla lilies, or like the seaside painting, the grapes, the mountains, all of the different. And we've also done a really nice new one, which is daisies, where we used frisket. So this is frisket. It's a masking fluid. It's called a resist pen. And in the daisy painting, we masked out the whole area for the daisies and their stems, and then we really saturated the background with a lot of color. And then we were able to peel off the frisket and paint the daisies very delicately like this calla lily. So message me if you have any questions at all, or message Art World. And in the meantime, have fun painting and hope you can join us.